Welcome to the Deep Dive. Today, we're cracking open a stack of source material that offers a really compelling perspective on why we might feel stuck,
Mm.
disconnected, or
Yeah.
just not quite right in our own skin.
Mm.
We're looking at excerpts from a book that talks about what it truly means to do the work.
Right.
And it frames this not just as some abstract self-help concept, but a process rooted in transcending our immediate human experience to gain deeper insight.
Into ourselves, our place in the community.
Exactly. And the incredible complex connection between our mind, body, and, well, what you might call soul.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
This material introduces a framework it calls holistic psychology. And the core idea here is that the common struggles many of us face, battling an inner critic, getting caught in difficult relationship dynamics.
Feeling overwhelmed or detached.
Yeah, those aren't solely psychological. They're deeply intertwined with our physical state, our past experiences, and the ways we were conditioned, often from a very young age.
And it backs us up with some genuinely fascinating science, touching on areas like epigenetics and the gut-brain connection.
Really cutting-edge stuff.
So our mission today is to take these sources, unpack the key concepts, distill the most powerful takeaways, and see what practical insights and tools they offer for understanding ourselves on a fundamental level and maybe, creating some lasting change.
Sound good?
So let's dive in.
Okay.
This journey into the work often starts with a feeling that's probably incredibly relatable for many of us, feeling stuck.
Definitely.
The source asks some pointed questions right away, like, do you find yourself reacting emotionally in ways that feel out of control? Maybe even feeling ashamed about it later?
Right.
Or do you often feel distracted, disconnected from yourself, from others, or even just from the present moment?
Really thinking.
It also probes whether you're constantly battling that relentless internal critic or finding yourself repeating the same difficult patterns, in your relationships or your life in general.
And this isn't just some vague malaise the source is describing.
Yeah.
It makes a direct link between this feeling of stuckness and our past experiences and conditioning.
Okay.
The argument is that the repetitive patterns we see playing out in our adult lives often have their roots in earlier experiences, particularly those from childhood.
The author shares a really vivid personal account of this. They describe experiencing these debilitating physical issues, brain fog so severe they'd forget common words,
Oh,
persistent and uncomfortable gut problems, and even unexplained fainting spells.
serious physical symptoms.
Yeah, and at the same time, they felt emotionally detached, almost numb. Initially, like many of us might, they viewed these physical and emotional issues as totally separate problems.
Which makes sense on the surface. But this is where a core insight from the source emerges. The powerful realization that these physical symptoms weren't isolated medical issues. They were, in fact, physical manifestations of unresolved emotional and psychological experiences, particularly childhood traumas, that had literally wired and dysregulated their body's nervous system.
So the physical symptoms were a signal.
Exactly. A signal of deeper unresolved issues. This highlights the central powerful idea this material presents, that our physical and emotional states aren't just linked, they're two sides of the same coin.
Right.
And physical dysregulation can be a massive barrier to mental and emotional progress.
That makes a lot of sense.
This brings us to the science this material digs into to explain these connections. Epigenetics, for instance, is highlighted as really shifting our understanding away from strict genetic determinism.
Okay, epigenetics.
Yeah.
What's the core idea there?
Well, the old thinking was that our health, our risk for certain diseases or psychiatric conditions, were largely pre-programmed by our DNA from birth.
Right, like it's just baked in.
But epigenetics shows the incredible impact our daily environment and experience, especially chronic stress and trauma, have on how our genes are expressed.
So it's not that our genes are destiny. We're not just locked into whatever code we were born with.
Not entirely, no.
We actually have agency in influencing our health and well-being at a biological level.
Exactly. And the source argues that seeing beyond that narrative of genetic destiny is crucial for empowering ourselves to create change.
That's huge.
Another key scientific area explored is the gut-brain connection. It talks about the enteric nervous system, or ENS,
ENS.
which is this incredibly complex network of nerve cells embedded in the wall of our gut. It's so intricate, it's often referred to as our second brain.
A literal second brain
Yeah.
in your stomach. That sounds wild.
Well, in a sense, it's not a conscious brain like the one in your head, but it's a highly sophisticated system. The ENS gathers information from the microbiome, all the bacteria and other microbes living in our gut.
Okay.
And here's where it gets really interesting. These gut microbes actually produce neurotransmitters.
They make them.
Yeah. The source notes that something like 90% of the body's serotonin, that crucial neurotransmitter linked to mood and well-being, is made in the gut.
90%. Wow.
This directly influences our emotional state. So that feeling of being sick to my stomach when you're nervous isn't just an expression.
It's real.
Your emotional state is physically impacting your gut and vice versa.
Wow, that connection feels so tangible, and it absolutely resonates with the author's own physical symptoms we talked about.
It really does.
What else does the source reveal about how our bodies respond to stress and trauma?
A fundamental concept they introduce is the polyvagal theory.
Polyphagal. Okay.
This explains how our vagus nerve acts like a primary pathway, constantly assessing safety and danger and influencing our nervous system state. There are three main states.
3 states.
Social engagement, where you feel safe and connected. Mobilization, the feel your fight or flight response.
Right.
And the most primitive state, immobilization, where the body essentially shuts down or plays dead.
Ah, the bear analogy from the source. If the bear's far away, you might run. That's mobilization. But if it's right on top of you, your system might just freeze up completely. Immobilization.
Precisely. And the source explains that this immobilization state is where dissociation often comes in a mental detachment. People might feel like they're observing themselves from a distance, like being on a spaceship, they call it. Or they might experience amnesia about the event later. This offers a profound insight into why some people have very fragmented or few memories of past stressful events.
Because if your psychological self wasn't fully present.
Exactly. There wasn't a conscious experience to store as a memory. It also makes it incredibly difficult to return to a sense of presence or safety if your nervous system is wired to default to that detached state.
So our physical survival response, particularly when learned early in the face of trauma, can actually lead to emotional detachment and gaps in our memory.
It really connects the physical, emotional, and psychological consequences of stress. It's all linked. And tied into this is the concept of neuroception.
Neuroception.
This is our nervous system's unconscious, automatic process of scanning for cues of safety or danger in the environment, often below the level of conscious thought. It's like a sixth sense.
Okay.
This can trigger fight, flight, or freeze even in situations that logically aren't threatening, explaining why social interactions might feel inherently unsafe for someone whose system is wired for threat detection.
That makes sense of a lot of social anxiety, maybe.
It really does. But the amazing flip side is co-regulation.
Co-regulation.
When we interact with someone whose nervous system is in a state of social engagement reflected in their calm voice, open eyes, relaxed body language, our own nervous system can pick up on those cues and begin to feel safer too.
It's like our nervous systems are constantly talking to each other, exchanging information about safety or threat.
Constantly communicating, yeah.
Unconsciously.
And speaking of the mind's power, the source also delves into the placebo and nocebo effects. This dramatically illustrates how belief itself can influence physical outcomes. Oh, definitely.
The example of the man in the clinical trial is chilling, attempting overdose on 29 sugar pills because he believed they were active medication with severe side effects.
Right.
And then experiencing near-death symptoms purely from his negative thoughts and expectations.
It really hammers home the point that our thoughts and beliefs aren't just, airy-fairy concepts. They have a very real physical impact.
Absolutely undeniable in that case.
Yeah.
Okay, so we've seen how our bodies and nervous systems get wired based on past experiences. Let's shift gears and look at how our minds are shaped by all of this.
Right. So this material suggests that a huge portion of our day, something like 95%, is spent on subconscious autopilot.
95%.
Only about 5% is conscious choice. This autopilot is heavily influenced by our conditioning and something called a homeostatic impulse.
Homeostatic impulse.
Which fundamentally seeks familiarity.
So our brain actually prefers the familiar, even if that familiar state is painful or keeps us stuck in unhealthy patterns.
Counterintuitive, right? But yes, the familiar feels safe because the outcome is predictable, even if that outcome is negative.
Wow.
Trying to consciously change these patterns triggers mental resistance, those cyclical thoughts, I'll start tomorrow, it's too hard, or physical discomfort, like agitation or anxiety, as the subconscious mind tries to pull us back to the known because it's more efficient. It conserves energy.
So it's fighting against change. And where does this powerful conditioning primarily come from?
A really significant part is learned from our earliest bonds, particularly with our parent figures.
Makes sense.
As children, We are completely dependent and biologically wired to learn how to survive and navigate the world from those around us.
Yeah.
We literally download everything, not just how to walk or talk, but what to believe about ourselves and our place in the world.
We absorb it all.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And because children are egocentric, meaning that they struggle to differentiate between themselves and others and often assume things happen to them because of them.
Right. The world revolves around them.
Yeah. So if their physical, emotional, or spiritual needs aren't consistently met, they can internalize false, painful beliefs, like the author's example of hiding under the kitchen table and internalizing, I'm bad, or I am not considered.
Oof. That sounds incredibly heavy. How do we even begin to address those deep-seated beliefs and the wounds they create?
Well, the source introduces the concept of acknowledging our inner child and its wounds.
The inner child. Okay.
It makes the point that even as from an adult perspective, our childhood wasn't that bad, our child brain experienced things differently, bigger, more intensely, and without the capacity to understand nuance or external factors.
So our adult logic doesn't really apply to that child experience.
Not directly, no. And the core insight here is that accepting this inner child wound is absolutely crucial to letting go of the shame we might feel about being stuck or struggling to change.
Okay.
That inability to move forward isn't a fundamental flaw in who you are now. It's often an extension of these conditioned patterns and core beliefs stemming from that hurt inner child.
So the inner child is a part of us, a significant part shaped by those early experiences, but it's not the whole of who we are or our potential.
Exactly. The inner child represents those past experiences and the resulting beliefs and coping mechanisms.
Got it.
The practice introduced here is to learn to witness that wounded part with curiosity, like an observer, gathering information about the narrative it's running.
Witnessing with curiosity.
For example, when you get that rush of anxiety after criticism, what story is that inner child part telling you about your worth or safety? Just notice it.
This starts to paint a clear picture of how these internal patterns might show up in our relationships. The material uses the term trauma bonds.
Right. Trauma bonds are defined not just in romantic contexts, but as patterns in any relationship dynamic.
Any relationship.
Yeah, it could be friends, family, partners, even colleagues.
Yeah.
Patterns that keep us locked into interactions that don't support our authentic, essential self.
Yeah.
They are, fundamentally, patterns learned and conditioned in childhood based on those early unmet needs and then unconsciously repeated in adult relationships.
The author gives several relatable examples from their own life and others. Their own pattern of alternating between emotional distance and unexpected reactivity, which mirrored their early bonds. Or Jessica's cycle of anxiety driving her to people pleasers, then feeling overwhelmed, leading to partying, and finally spiraling into shame in her relationship.
Yeah, those cycles can be vicious. And the powerful dynamic between Shira and Joshua is a classic illustration.
Tell us about that.
Shira, with abandonment wounds, compulsively chased connection. What's wrong? Are you mad? Joshua, having learned to suppress his emotions to manage his own childhood environment, would withdraw when stressed or depleted.
So, approach and withdraw.
Exactly. An avoidant coping mechanism or dissociation. Neither person was getting their core needs met, creating distance, and, crucially, leading to resentment.
And the source calls resentment a relationship killer.
It does.
Yeah.
Because it just erodes everything.
So, we are often unconsciously drawn to repeat these familiar, even painful patterns in relationships because they feel like home. Like that stress train the author admits being addicted to in an early relationship because it mirrored the chaos they grew up with. It's that deep pull back to the familiar homeostasis.
It is. And the source frames this as a form of self-betrayal, participating in dynamics that actively don't serve us, purely because they are known.
Self-betrayal. That's strong.
We get stuck in this feedback loop, almost addicted to the emotional hits, even negative ones, because they provided a sense of release or predictability in childhood.
Yeah.
The alternative presented, in stark contrast, is authentic love.
Which, based on everything else, sounds less like a Hollywood rom-com and more like, oh, work.
Yeah, it's described as a safe space for mutual evolution.
Mutual evolution.
Grounded in peace and a sense of deep knowing, not the frantic, high-low emotional roller coaster of a trauma bond. It requires conscious work from both people. It doesn't mean you won't sometimes feel bored or unsettled, or that you won't find other people attractive. It's about making a conscious choice to show up.
A choice.
From a place of mutual respect and allowing each other the freedom and safety to be fully seen, heard, and self-expressed.
Okay, so if we start recognizing these patterns, our conditioning, the wounds of the inner child, and how they play out, how do we actually do the work to break free and move towards something like authentic connection?
Good question. The material offers several core practices. The first is self-witnessing.
We touched on that, observing.
Yeah, becoming the observer of your own internal world. Watching your thoughts, feelings, and behaviors arise without immediate judgment, simply gathering information. This is presented as fundamental to identifying those underlying core beliefs.
The source even provides prompts to help with this, encouraging you to just notice and write down recurring narratives in your mind, whatever they might be.
Exactly, just getting curious about them. Another crucial practice is reparenting the inner child.
Reparenting.
This involves actively learning to meet your own physical, emotional, and even spiritual needs through daily action. The source emphasizes cultivating loving discipline here.
Loving discipline, what does that mean?
It's not about being harsh, but about keeping the small promises you make to yourself each day, developing consistent rituals or routines, and learning to say no to things that genuinely don't serve you or deplete your energy.
Ah, okay. And setting boundaries seems like a massive part of that loving discipline and protecting your energy.
It's absolutely key. The source stresses that boundaries are essential for honoring your own needs. It uses examples like saying no to being someone's emotional dumping ground.
Right, protecting your space.
It suggests starting small, maybe in less emotionally charged relationships, saying no to an extra work task that drains you, or declining a lunch invitation with a coworker if you need that time to yourself.
For build that muscle, yeah.
Exactly. Because the cost of not setting boundaries is immense.
Oh.
Feeling drained, unfulfilled, and building resentment.
We saw that with Shira and Joshua.
Precisely. The author shares their own powerful journey of setting what felt like an ultimate boundary through separation from their marriage,
Wow.
framing it as a necessary act to show their inner child that they could make choices that were genuinely good for them, even if it meant disappointing someone else.
That takes incredible courage. And given how much the science section tied into the body, what about incorporating mind-body practices?
Mind-body healing is presented as essential for restoring balance to the nervous system, which, as we discussed, is often dysregulated by past experiences.
Okay, like what?
Deep belly breathing is highlighted as a simple but powerful tool to calm the nervous system in the moment.
Just simple breathing.
Yeah. Nutrition and approaches like intermittent fasting are discussed for supporting gut health and metabolic flexibility, which the source notes can significantly impact mental acuity and mood.
Interesting.
Though it warns that initial irritability is possible as your body adjusts away from being a sugar burner, as they put it.
Good to know.
And movement is emphasized not just for physical health, but for building stress tolerance, improving mood by releasing beneficial neurochemicals like dopamine and serotonin.
The feel-good chemicals.
And even supporting brain health by stimulating new neuronal pathways.
And the material's clear that the goal here isn't some kind of immediate, perfect state of never feeling triggered, right? The author mentions still experiencing trauma reactions.
That's a really important point the source makes. It's not about eradicating difficult feelings or reactions. It's about developing emotional regulation and tolerance.
Tolerance, okay.
It's moving beyond just the automatic coping strategies learned in childhood towards proactive soothing, making a conscious choice about how you respond to discomfort, and increasing your capacity to endure distress when necessary without immediately falling back into old patterns.
So building resilience.
Yes, emotional maturity within this framework is defined as understanding your own emotional boundaries and being able to communicate them clearly to others without fear or shame. It's about learning to see those trauma reactions, not as personal failures, but as signals from an overtaxed system, and offering yourself grace while you build new capacities.
This deep dive into what this source calls doing the work really gives us so much to consider. It masterfully connects the dots between our physical bodies, the experiences of our childhood, the dynamics in our adult relationships.
And our actual capacity to create meaningful change in our lives.
Yeah.
It challenges the perhaps ingrained idea that we are simply products of our genetic code or our past circumstances, instead emphasizing the incredible power of conscious action and the innate resilience of our bodies and minds to heal and transform. It reframes our struggles not as fundamental character flaws, but often as incredibly smart, learned survival mechanisms developed in response to early environments that weren't fully supportive.
That's a much more compassionate view.
It really is.
And perhaps the most empowering takeaway is that the work isn't some external task or a destination out there. Based on this material, it is something that is inherently in you and must ultimately come from you.
Right. And finally, the sources offer a compelling vision of what lies on the other side of this work, a sense of awakening
Okay.
and deeper connection.
Awakening.
It suggests that as we create safety within our own nervous systems and consciously engage with our inner world, we naturally open ourselves up to more authentic connection with others and perhaps a sense of connection with something greater than ourselves,
Hmm.
leading to moments of awe and a feeling of collective unity. That feeling of true unity, the source posits, is only truly accessible when our bodies feel fully safe.
Which leaves us with this thought for you to ponder based on this incredible material.
Hmm.
If the core of who you are is truly a unique soul, fundamentally wired for connection,
Uh-huh.
what experiences might become possible in the world if you allowed yourself to feel completely, utterly safe?